G'day legends, are you ready for the best, most in-depth MIDI drum mixing tutorial you have ever witnessed? Because if so, stick around because we're going to dive into this and get straight into making those MIDI drums sound awesome. Hopefully I can deliver on what I just proposed. If not, I apologize. So if you want to take your drums from sounding like this to sounding like this, then stick around. So the drum library that I'm going to be using is Spinlight Drums 5.5. This isn't a sponsored video, by the way. I just like using this drum library. I also have Get Good Drums Modern and Massive, and I also used to use Superior Drummer 2 quite a lot back in the day. So whether you're using any of those libraries or the Logic stock drum libraries, it's all going to translate pretty much the same. So I'm going to treat this pretty much like you've never mixed MIDI drums before, even though you probably know a lot of this stuff. We're just going to cover everything that you need to know to be able to get this right. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is load up a software instrument. Press Command Option N if you're using Logic, and then we can just double click on MIDI. Now let's just reset this channel strip and then delete these sends that are created. Now I'm just going to label this SSD, and I'm going to bring my little MIDI drum beat that I've already made down here. And then we need to click on Instrument, come down to AU Instruments, Spinlight SSD5. Multi-output, very important to select that one. Okay, let's open it up. So now let's come up to the Create tab, and we're going to click on Kits. So we can just select a pre-made drum kit now. If you wanted to, you could go in the Instrument tab and you could audition different sounds. You could build a kit, you know, you can drag a kick onto here, come look at some snares. I'm in the Blackbird kit at the moment, but you could go through any of these libraries that you have. If it's just the SSD5 stuff, or if you have expansions, you can then just custom create a kit. But we're going to go into kits and we're just going to load up Metal Man. This is a pretty good sounding pre-made kit. Good sounding samples, good sounding kit. There's a clap, I'm gonna get rid of this. And there's a tambourine, I'm gonna get rid of that. And I'm gonna get rid of the cowbell. Don't need any of that stuff. And so one of the cool things in SSD5 is you can load up multiple samples at once. So you can see on the side here, we've got some extra kicks and snares that are already part of this pre-made kit. So anytime you program a kick, it's actually gonna play both of these samples at once. And if you've got like 3 snares, it's gonna play all 3 snares at once. So you can really customize the sound by layering sounds together until it sounds the way that you like. But this preset is pretty good for like that hard rock metal kind of sound, so we're gonna go with that. Now the next thing we're gonna do is assign the multiple outputs so that in our DAW, we can mix each individual sound on its own channel. At the moment, everything's just coming back onto one channel, so we play these drums. So in SSD5, let's come over to the Mix tab, and down the bottom here, we can select the outputs. So I'm gonna keep it pretty simple. I'm gonna keep all of the kicks on channel 1. So that's our kick direct, kick in, kick out. I'm gonna put all the snares on channel 2. Now you can split this up as much as you want. You can have your kick in, your kick out, your snare top, your snare bottom, all on separate channels. And if you've got multiple samples, you could have each of them on their own channels. You can split this up as much as you want. I find that when I'm mixing MIDI drums, I like to keep it pretty simple. Unless there's a really special sound that I need on its own, I'm going to group stuff together as much as possible and make the processing a whole lot simpler. So that's just a preference thing. And sometimes I will split this stuff up. But for this kind of thing, I'm feeling like we'll just keep it all very simple. And now our toms, I'm going to send them all to channel 3. Again, you can put these on their own individual channels if you wanted to. The thing is with MIDI drums, they've already had a little bit of EQing, maybe a little bit of processing done to them. And you can hear when you pick a set of toms, they already have a sonic signature to them. Like these toms, if you click on them, you can hear they all sound really cohesive and nice together. So by putting them all on a single channel, I can process that channel and just change the overall sonic signature of all of the toms at once. If one sounded brighter and one sounded darker and one was muddy, then sure, you'd want to put them on individual channels and sculpt them till they sound like a matching set of toms. They already sound matched, so that's why I'm putting them all on an individual channel. And you can do all of your panning within SSD5 as well. Now hi-hats, we're gonna put these on channel 4, ride on channel 5, overhead on channel 6, and then we've got 2 room channels and an SLR. The SLR is the bleed of the kick and the toms that you would pick up in the snare bottom mic. This adds a level of authenticity, so you could just send this to your snare channel if you wanted to. I'm gonna feed it into the rooms as well. So just having it in there just adds, again, a little bit of authenticity. So we're going to send all of our rooms and the SLR to output 7. Now in our DAW, we need to expand out our instrument channel here. So in Logic, you can come down to this little plus symbol and just click on that and expand it out. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 channels. So the channel that SSD5 is loaded on becomes channel 1. So we're going to change this to kick and then label these accordingly. And I'm going to color this differently as well. So if I press play now, it should be all split up. There's no hats or rides in this. Okay, so there's no hi-hat or ride in this particular mix that I'm working on, but it's there if we needed it. So that's perfect. Now we can apply processing as needed to each of these individual channels. Okay, before we take a look at the processing, let's take a look at the programming side of MIDI drums. What we need to do to make sure these sound a little bit more authentic and less robotic. In the end, MIDI drums are MIDI drums. You can make them sound as good as possible, but if you want a real drummer, hire a session drummer. That's literally all I have to say about it. Like, MIDI drums are fun. They can sound pretty cool. You can get a pretty decent result. But if you want real drums, get a real drummer. So with that disclaimer out the side, let's have a look at what we can do to make these as good as possible. Okay, so here's my beats. So the thing you need to have a look at is the different shades here on the MIDI. We are not just one solid color, not just one solid velocity. There is a lot of difference here. So this stuff down the bottom here, this is our velocity value. So you can see it all varies nicely like it would with a drummer. It doesn't have to be dramatic, because if it's a really consistent drummer, they're not gonna be that far apart in their MIDI. You're not gonna have stuff that's like all the way down here or whatever. It needs to be consistent, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. So you can see over here, these are all one velocity, very straight here. I just programmed this, so I haven't actually got around to tweaking it. So this is a good opportunity to do that now. Basically what you can do is you can either come through and you can, just manually push these around, add a bit of variety to them, or you could select all of these kicks. In Logic, you can come up to Functions, MIDI Transform, come down to Humanize, and then we can set a value here. So we could just set it to 5 or 6, and then because we already have this highlighted, we click Operate Only. And you can see all of those velocity values just move slightly. So that's a really quick way of adding some humanizing to your MIDI. So if you program some drums out, you could just select them all, come into Humanize, maybe put a value somewhere between 5 and 10, and then hit Operate, and it's going to just add all these little variations throughout your MIDI, which does help make it sound a bit more authentic. That's the quick and easy way if you don't want to manually do it. But obviously there are some things that by doing it manually, it's going to sound a little bit better. And for example, when there's bits like here where there's a double kick. So I've kind of pushed down the second kick a little bit further, because the way drummers are, their left foot's never really quite as solid as their right foot. Even really good drummers, their left foot's just never quite exactly the same. And it adds a bit more authenticity by just having them slightly different like that. If we were to flatten those out, have a listen to how much more machine gun it sounds. Sounds way more authentic. Even the fill, you can see I've done a similar thing. Every second hit is a little bit softer because it's the left hand in the roll. If you're a right-handed drummer, your left hand's a little bit weaker usually. So these kind of things add a bit more realism to the drum sound. So they're all things that you can do to make the MIDI sound more authentic. So check this fill out here. So this snare here, it's quite soft. Now as a drummer who's done a lot of session drumming and recording, I know that when I do a fill like this, I don't hit this snare with the same intensity as if I'm doing a backbeat. I generally am going to have this top and center on the snare, and it's going to be a fast roll, and it's not going to have quite as much power in it as when I'm just slamming into a beat. So by pulling that velocity down there, actually makes this sound way more authentic to me. So have a listen to what this sounds like if we have it at 100%. But like that second snare is way too loud in my opinion for that style of roll. When we pull that velocity back to where I put it, that sounds way more authentic. Drummers aren't hitting the drums at 100% power all the time. So those little quirks and those little things actually make the drum sound way more realistic. Sometimes as a guitarist or just someone who doesn't play drums and you're programming drums, that level of understanding of drumming can be a little lost. Even as a drummer, you may just kind of just punch it in and be like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. But when you play it on the actual drums, that's not exactly how you would play it. So if you really start thinking about how hard do I actually hit things when I do these kind of rolls, or am I hitting a rim shot, or am I top and center when I'm doing that? That stuff creates way more authenticity in your MIDI drum sound. So you can see I'm not really hitting anything at like 127, the highest value. Generally around 110 to 120 is where I like the sort of hard hitting stuff. Obviously it's going to depend on the library and what it sounds like at those values. But you can see here we've got the China cranked all the way to the top because I wanted that to be like someone just absolutely hammering into a China like they're trying to kill it. Which sounds sick to me. So you just got to play with it until it sounds the way that you want it to. You can go another step further if you want to add a little bit more realism, and you can mess with the timing a little bit so it's not so perfect. I don't really have an issue against like sort of perfect drums. I do like to hear them really tight, but you can tweak this. So basically let's just press Command A and highlight all of these. Now because we've got some 30-second notes, let's change our value to 30-second notes. And then we're gonna just zoom in a bit here to really see what's happening, because I don't want to change this a lot. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to bring our strength back. We can see it's not really doing much. It's doing a little bit. That might be all we need. You can see it's just moving slightly, which could be enough to add a bit of realism. You could also tweak the swing. You can see it does start to get a bit weird. Push it to one side very fractionally, and then having that strength pull back a bit. And I can just add slight variation to your timing so it's not pristine. So just little tweaks that you can do to just overall try and help it sound authentic. Okay, so now that we've covered the MIDI side of things, let's have a look at what we can do within SSD5 to optimize these drums before we start mixing them. So there's a couple little tricks I want to show you here which are really worth their weight in gold to making these sound the very best. So we click on our Edit tab. Now let's select a drum. Let's come down to our kick, click on that, and now have a look up here at the ADSR section. What we're going to do is we're going to tweak this. This is basically going to act like a gate for us. We're going to stop any extra resonance on the drums past the point where we want it. So we don't want our kick to be like boom and have like a big note after it. Particularly if we're working on something like rock or metal, even pop stuff, you want the kick to be kind of short. Really short, punchy kick sound. Hear that sound? It's like the kick blooms. We don't really want the bloom, not for this kind of style of music anyway. So let's come over to sustain and just pull this right back. Usually I like it around 0.02, and then I'm going to pull the release back, and I'm going to put this around 0.3, 0.4, maybe even 0.2. Like somewhere in here is like the sweet spot. So at the moment we're hearing everything, the overheads in the room. So come over to the mixer and solo your kick. Bring this up to around 0.25. Nice, short and punchy. Come back to the mixer and have a look at our kick out. Let's have a listen to what this sounds like. So let's click on kick out up here, apply the same settings. Now you could hit this link button, but you can see it grabs everything, overheads and the rooms. I'm not sure if we want to have the overheads and rooms shortened. We just want these direct mics to be shortened. So let's do the same settings, 0.02 and then 0.24, somewhere around there. Nice short punchy sound. Now have you got any extra samples on the side? Find those. Now you can see this kick has already been adjusted in this preset. So it's basically just got a big transient and then not much sustain at all. So this is going to be great for just a real punchy sound. Mostly attack really. So we don't need to tweak that. Okay, so then we come over to our snare. So you can hear the snare's got a bit of ring to it. Let's just shorten it up a little bit. I don't mind the ring, but let's just shorten it a touch. So let's bring our sustain down to 0.02. You can play with the decay time, but I usually find just leaving that and shortening the sustain and then just like setting the release time generally works really well for me. I'm going to put this to around 0.7. If we solo that snare, yeah, so we might lengthen that out to keep it a bit more natural sounding. Put it around like 1 second even. Sounds pretty good. You see where we link it. The room sound gets shorter as well. I think we'll just leave it unlinked so we can keep that sort of long room sound. And so a cool little thing is you can double click on one of these settings and then click on the channel and it applies it to that channel. So copy those settings to snare, top, bottom, and ring. Now where this is really important is on the toms. Like that it just rings for days. And so while that sounds cool in the mix, once a fill happens, you just get this, and the tom just keeps going. Generally with live drums, you put a gate on it and sort of cut that stuff away. But we don't need to use a gate plugin because we can address this right here in the ADSR section. So let's dial this in a little bit. So again, let's shorten this down and just give everything about 1 second. Might sound a little choppy on its own, but in the mix it'll be fine. So now when we have a fill play, we're not going to have all of this rumble that continues on. It sounds nice and tight. And when you've got bass guitar and other like low end sounds in the mix, it starts to really get muddy. On its own, you're like, yeah, that sounds cool. But yes, once everything's all there together, it becomes problematic. So it's starting to sound really tight and punchy now. Okay, and the other little thing that I'm gonna tweak now while we're here is I'm gonna just pull back some of the cymbals in our room mics. I personally don't want a lot of cymbals in the room mic. It's usually one of those things that you can kind of struggle with live drums is you want to get this big explosive compressed room sound, but there's always a ton of cymbal in it, and when you start compressing it, it usually just ends up being like a big cymbal-y mess. So we can kind of control that here in the MIDI, which is awesome. So to do that, we're just going to click on our cymbal, and then we're going to come up here to our room sounds, and we're just going to pull these down. I'm going to pull them back to around, I don't know, minus 15 or so. From what I've done before, usually around there sounds cool. And we just do the same for every cymbal. So if we solo our room now, so we've still got a bit of cymbals in there, but there's more shell sound now. So we can apply processing, go a little bit harder on it, and that will bring the cymbals forward a little bit more, but we're also gonna get a really explosive shell sound, which is gonna be really cool. So that's a cool thing that you can do in Stephen Slate drums. I'm not sure if you can do that in exactly every other drum library. Maybe in Get Good Drums, I think maybe I've seen you can do some level of control with like the bleed of sounds that goes around. So whichever MIDI library you're using, just see if that's an option that you can do. Okay, so we've picked our sounds, we've set up the routing, and we've looked at the MIDI, and then we've done a little bit of tweaking within the sampler itself, and now we're ready to start mixing these drums. So for the mixing section, I'm gonna use mostly VMR, Slate Digital plugins, to get this going. So I know a lot of people use the Slate Digital subscription, so it just keeps it kind of simple. We just use like sort of one batch of plugins to do this. Obviously, it's all the same, like it's just EQ, compression, whatever. Like it's just in different shapes and sizes. So you can do this with any plugins. You can follow along and look at all the different EQ points and whatever, but I'm going to be doing it within Stephen Slate's VMR. And I'm going to use one Waves plugin. There is one Waves plugin that I kind of like hold dear to my drum mixing, and for some reason, it's just become kind of an integral part of my drum mixes. So I'll get to that in a second. So what I want to do first is get all of these channels into a drum bus. So if we right click on this, we can create a track stack. And we're going to go summing stack, hit create. And you can see it's put all of our tracks into this little stack here. So we can call this drums. And then all of our channels are in here. In the global window, we can only see the kick. If you wanted to see all of the channels in the global window, which can be really helpful if you want to start doing automation to individual channels, come over to the mixer, highlight all of these, and then right click and hit create track. So now it's placed all of those individual tracks within the global window, but the kick is still our main one that has SSD5 on it, so you still need to keep your MIDI on that one. So what we're gonna do is go from the top down. So we're gonna apply processing to the drum bus first, and then work our way down. So let's load up Slate Digital's VMR. I like to use VCC, just adds like a little bit of like analog flavor, like a mixing desk would impart upon a sound. So we've got it on the Brit 4KE. Then we're gonna add some compression and we're gonna go with the distressor. Now we're gonna hit the drums pretty hard here and then we're gonna parallel process this right here on the drum bus. We could set up a parallel send, like if you watch any of my drum mixing videos, we can set up sends, we can do parallel compression and blend it in. But I have found that this sounds really good on MIDI drums. They're already kind of processed, they're already sounding semi-decent. So I find that if you keep the processing a little bit simpler, you generally end up with better results. So we're gonna do our parallel processing right here on the drum bus. So I think that's sounding pretty cool, nice and punchy. So I'm aiming for roughly around 10 to 12 dBs on the meter here. I find that's kind of like a nice sweet spot on the FG stress when you're going for that really aggressive drum sound. Roughly around 30–35% on the mix, sounds pretty good. We've got the high pass detector engaged. Now I'm gonna add revival. This can add a little bit of extra like low end energy as well as a bit of sparkle shimmer to the top end. So let's test this out. Like, that sounds pretty good already. That adds that sort of nice, pristine, polished sound to it. See how much more like air the cymbals have. The snare snaps a little bit harder. The kick's got a clicky top end to it, as well as like a nice thump to the low end of it now as well. These kind of plugins, you always feel kind of dumb using them because it's just like two knobs, but they just make the mix sound better. So really liking what this is adding to it. All right, so big difference already. Drum bus is adding some nice punch, but also getting a little bit of nice shaping now as well. Now I'm gonna follow this up with a second round of compression, and we're gonna use the faithful FG Grey, which is kind of like our SSL bus compressor kind of thing. And we're just gonna go for some really gentle compression with this one. We've already got a lot of compression. This is just gonna be like the glue. That's all it is, just like a little bit of compression on top, massaging it all together. I think that sounds really nice. We've just got a medium attack, fast release. Could even just push this back to 0.2, might sound good as well. Just adds that extra little bit of punch. Just holding on to the compression that little bit longer. Snappy and punchy. Just pull that threshold down so we're getting like 1 to 2 dBs of gain reduction, 3:1 ratio. And then on the high pass filter, I just lift this until the kick's just getting a little bit of compression. Don't mind if it compresses a little bit harder on the snare. I don't want the kick to be getting more compression than what the snare's getting, because then you just get that really like pumpy sound. And that's it. And then the last thing on mix bus, if you watch any of my drum mixing videos, it's always just like the same plugin at the end of my drum mixes. It's the Waves L3 LL Ultra. And I like to put this in the cozy and warm mode. And then I just like to pull this down to roughly around -4. This kind of just works out where I like my drums to be hitting in my mixes. Gonna turn off any diver or any shaping stuff. All right, so far, pretty happy with that. We're just getting a little bit of gain reduction. We might see a little bit more as we go along, but at the moment, that's fine. Now, I've tried heaps of different limiters on the drum bus. I don't know what it is about this one on the cozy and warm profile, but it's just something I like. I like the sound of it, and so I'm just drawn to using this on my drum bus. Occasionally, I'll use a clipper instead, or I will try a different limiter, but this is one that I come back to pretty regularly. Of course, if you've got the Slate Digital bundle, you can always use FGX2. I did test that out before, it sounded pretty good, but overall I still kind of preferred the sound of this on my drum bus. Now let's mix this kick. Like overall, that already sounds good to me. Like it's a processed kick sound. It's there, like it's pretty much there. I don't feel like I need to do a lot to this. We're just gonna maybe compress it a bit, add some saturation to it. But overall the sound of the kick sounds pretty good. Not a lot that I want to change to that. So a really awesome thing about mixing with MIDI drums is you can pick sounds that already sound great that don't need heaps done to them. Unlike live drums where sometimes you've really got to work them really hard to make them sound the way that you want, and then even then you might still add in samples to enhance them. With MIDI drums, you basically just have pristine sounds to work with straight away. I kind of go between different moods with the kick. Like I'll generally go between like the VCA style compression or an 1176 or the Opto. You know, they're the three kind of go-tos. I feel like the Opto adds a really cool flavor. You can hear we lose a lot of the low end, but if we pull the mix knob back, just making those kicks slap a little bit harder. I think that sounds pretty cool. Let's add a tiny bit of EQ. Let's just cut a little bit around, maybe kind of like 250. So with the FGA, if you hold down Command and click and drag, then you don't go through stepped amounts of gain reduction. You can really just fine tune it. Kind of cool. Let's add a little bit of saturation to it. Kind of digging that. I'm going to pull a little bit of top end off the 10K. And so don't forget how important setting the level is. I felt like just pulling that back a little bit into the mix started to sound pretty good there. Even these guitars and stuff, we'll probably bring them up a little bit more later. We just kind of got them there while we're mixing. So for our kick sound, I feel like that's kind of pretty cool. Bit of compression, a little bit of EQ, bit of saturation. Yeah, sounds all right. Let's keep rolling on. So let's have a look at the snare drum now. Again, we've just got VCC on here, and then we're going to put a preamp at the front of this. And we're gonna get this clipping a little bit. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Just sort of like chops the transient down a little bit, makes it less spiky sounding. Just gonna go with some VCA compression, do a 4:1 ratio. Around there sounds pretty good to me. A couple of dBs of gain reduction, a slow attack with a fast release. I'm gonna use the custom lift here. So just gonna go on punchy and present. I think that sounds pretty cool. Just adds a little bit of thickness, a little bit of snap to the top end. And then we're gonna do a similar thing again with revival. I feel like we could just add a little bit of like air to this. I just love that detail it adds. Extra little bit of thickness. So we're just basically giving it a smiley face really. We're boosting some lows and highs on both of these plugins. And then I'm just gonna boost a little bit more low end with the custom series EQ. Nice. Cool, let's add a little bit of saturation to the end of this. The Hollywood saturation is sort of like the smoothest sounding saturation. The New York one's a little bit edgier. London's, I don't know, it's got this thing going on that I don't particularly always love the sound of. This one just sounds the best to me. A little bit of output trim just to make sure we're not just getting louder. That sounded pretty cool. I'm gonna bring these room mics down a little bit. It sounded pretty sick. Let's get these toms mixed. So there's some pretty cool presets in here. I'm gonna load up the FG 116 Modern, which is like an 1176 kind of thing. And then we're going to go with toms big. Kind of cool, makes them nice and punchy. And then we're gonna get some EQ on here with the FGA. And there's a good little toms preset here. I've used this a few times and pretty much just gonna bring this mid scoop back out and just take a bit of this top end stuff. I feel like we've got a lot of low end in there and the mids sound okay. We just need the brightness. And this is boosting 10K and 5K, which are just good points on the toms to like add that stick attack. Sounds pretty cool. Let's trim this stuff back a bit. You know, when it's loud, I was like, ooh, that doesn't sound too good. Now it's tucked back and you hear it sort of where it's meant to be. It's like, actually, that works pretty good. So without anything, the toms still sound pretty good, but we've just given them a bit of edge and we're helping them to poke out of the mix a bit more. I dig that. Let's have a listen to the overheads. So just remember, we've got a bunch of compression on the drum bus. That does not sound like it needs any more compression to me. I think, if anything, I just want to do a small cut to these sort of upper frequencies, maybe around like 7, 8K, just pull a little bit of harshness out. I think that sounds pretty cool. that's pretty much all I want to do to these overheads. And you got to remember, these samples are recorded in amazing studios. So they're in a really well-treated room. You don't have any weird build-ups that you need to cut or anything like that. They sound pretty good already. Mostly just like that edge of the brightness, which could be getting added through a little bit of the revival and the compression on the mix bus, but overall it's making the drums sound great. Just dealing with this little bit of sizzly sound, it's just helping them sound a little bit nicer in the mix. And then it's pretty much like levels. Just play with the level of your overheads. I found pulling it down 1 dB sounded a bit better to me, but obviously just play with that stuff, get the balance right is really important. As we heard with the toms, when they were really loud, they sort of sounded a bit clunky sounding, but then when they were pulled back in the mix, they sounded good. Okay, so for our rooms, let's compress these a little bit. As you can see, this is my default startup. So I've got this saved as my default, loads VCC and a trimmer. Basically, I like having VCC whenever I load this up and then add my plugins. And then if I need to trim the volume at the end, it's great to have that there. So working smarter and not harder. So let's add some compression to these rooms. We're gonna use this compressor again, the FG116. Now again, let's just pull up a preset because there's some good presets in here. I'm gonna go with drum bass parallel, see what this sounds like. That's pretty much what I was looking for. Crank the input, just have slow attack, fast release. And then the sidechain in high pass, so all of the low end is not making the compressor work as hard. And then just pulling that mix knob back until it sounds good. Around here is perfect. So I love what that's adding. Let's pull this all the way down and then blend it in. Have a listen to how much the rooms just make the drum sound awesome. It's such an integral part of the drum sound. You hear when we had that turned all the way down, just how lame the drum sounded. Like, let's hear that again with no room sounds. Worlds apart. So the room sound is like what glues the kit together and makes it sound big. When you take all that away, everything just sounds really isolated and dry and just kind of lame. Okay, let's add a little bit of EQ after this. We're just gonna use Logic's stock EQ. I think at the moment it sounds pretty good as it is, but if we wanted to make the low end a little bit tighter, then we could do a low shelf or a high pass filter. If you do start using high pass filters on individual channels, make sure you're using a linear EQ because it does create weird phase shifts and it can put like the kick out of phase with the room or the kick out of phase with the overheads, or if you do a high pass filter on your snare, then it could go out of phase with your overhead. So you gotta be careful with that stuff. Make sure you use linear phase EQs to do your high pass filters. Try it out for yourself. Just test it out and see what you think. It's something I picked up really early on when I was mixing drums, is that I put a high pass filter on my snare and then all of a sudden the snare would sound thinner in the whole drum mix. And it's because it started to go out of phase with the overheads. And so then I'd maybe like flip the phase and it'd go back to normal. But using a linear phase EQ stops that from happening. So just something to be aware of, or else just use shelves and cut it that way. You can use a shelf and you can get rid of a lot of low end like that. So that's what we're gonna do here. We're just gonna cut around maybe 50, 60 Hertz, do a big cut, maybe 10 dBs. Same with the top end, we're gonna cut around maybe 12, 13. You can see it goes all the way up into 8K here. So that's why we're kind of going up high. And then again, pull that down a little bit. And this is just gonna give us a bit more mid-range focus on the room sound and stop the low end getting too boomy. So you can hear the kick sounds a lot tighter, and that can help in the mix because that extra bit of low end can really make the kick just like really thumpy and just sound like too bloated or bloomy sounding. Just a small cut to these low mids. just stop a bit of that sort of boxy sound going on. And that's pretty much it. For this type of mix, check this out. This is what we got. Let's crank our guitars up a bit more now. Okay, so let's take a look at what it sounded like before. Take all our processing off. Like, it sounds lame and weak at the moment. And, you know, we turned the guitars up before, but you can see we're still hitting a similar peak volume over here on our drum bus. Now that we've got all our processing on, we can have everything louder and the drums still sound massive. It's a world of difference, and we're not even using that many plugins. You can really keep it quite simple. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. We're not even using any buses or bus sends like that. And we've got a great sounding drum mix. Again, you could do all your parallel processing on buses. You could create a bus, and then you could add that bus into your track stacks. Add your parallel compression here, saturation, whatever you want. But like I was saying, these drums already have a level of processing done to them. You really don't have to work as hard on MIDI drum sounds to get them to sound big and massive. Like you do with real drums, there's generally a lot more work, a lot more EQing and tweaking to get them to a point where they sound good. Depending on the style and genre that you're working on, the blueprint will pretty much remain the same, but you just tweak your processing. So you might not EQ something as hard, or you might EQ it a little bit differently. Might not have as much compression. You might not need any parallel compression. You just play with your processing a little bit differently to achieve the sound that you're chasing. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful. And if you did, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you want to support this channel, make sure you check out the description link below. Come and visit my website, grab a sample pack or a mixing course. Any of that is a massive support for the time that goes into making content like this. If you're interested in seeing my approach to mixing live drums, then stick around for this next video.